Now I'll introduce the speakers that you just saw. Forrest is going to be, Forrest Lyford's going to doing a show on beavers, and he happens to be my husband. So you would think I wouldn't have to read, but I do. He grew up in rural southeastern New Hampshire, and the family moved to Petersham, Massachusetts, right before he started senior year of high school. And he's got a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Marietta College in Ohio, and a master's degree in hydrology from University of Arizona. He's most of his career was in the U.S. Geological Survey, and it was in New Mexico, and Arkansas, upstate New York, and Massachusetts. And he was on groundwork projects. That's what his main focus was. And since moving into Northborough in 1991, he's been enjoying the outdoors and exploring. So this is Forrest Lyford he's doing a program on beavers.
Okay, can everybody hear me if I speak at this volume? I can hear myself, that's okay. Definitely stop. The person who just introduced me sounded like she's known me for at least 50 years. You history buffs, Northborough history buffs, historians might recognize this statement from the Blue Book. The bicentennial booklet was written by Janice Parmenter. And this is an opening statement there. Northborough, of which Northborough was a part, was settled in 1656. In 1660, the year that Marlborough was incorporated, the first house lots were assigned to the inhabitants in meadowlands. That's my highlighting there. Within the present borders of the town of Northborough were apportioned. So we're going back to 1660 here. These lands were surveyed that year, such as Cold Harbor Brook, Meadow, Stirrup Meadow, etc., etc. Towns within this town, not specifically assigned, were designated as cow commons. About a year ago, my daughter gave me an early Christmas gift called Beaver Land. It's written by a professor at Holy Cross University, Leila Fellow, and it was published a couple of years ago, I guess. As I was reading this, I didn't get too far into the book before I realized that Beaver Land was not just the land around her place in northern Connecticut. It was the land, basically the North American continent. About that time, again, I'm not too far into it, a light bulb lit up. These meadowlands that Janice Parmenter talked about were probably beaver meadows. Why do I think that? Because the beaver are back. All of these meadows are now occupied. We'll show you a map here. This is a map that shows these various meadows that were alluded to by Janice Parmenter. And if you were to go out in these areas now, like I have over the last year or so, you'll find that beaver activity are everywhere. My thesis here is that the meadowlands that were described by Janice Parmenter were beaver meadows, but there's never any mention of beaver in any of these historical documents. And there's good reason for that, because the beaver were gone by 1660. I didn't realize, I always thought Pilgrims were the first people here, because something lacking in my education, I guess, there. But the beaver trade started long before the Pilgrims arrived. The beaver in Europe had been pretty much trapped out by the early 1600s. And so they were going across the ocean to find beaver pelts, as well as other animal pelts. And this started in the 1500s, long before the Pilgrims arrived. I just lacking in my education, I guess. I didn't realize that was the case. And when the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, they got into the act because they got debts to pay off. So they got into trapping as well. And so it was probably only 20 or 30 years before they were pretty much trapped out. As I got into the research here, I discovered that one of my ancestors, a eighth great-grandfather, was involved in the beaver trade. He and William Pinchon in the Connecticut Valley were trading with the Indians for beaver pelts. So one of my ancestors was partly responsible for the demise of these beavers. William Cronin, he's a well-known historian, pretty much summed it up. He says beavers were disappearing from Massachusetts coastal region by 1640 and ceased to be of much significance by 1660. I'm saying that rats. I'm saying that they're essentially gone when these meadowlands were allocated. This is a map that shows that approximately shows the distribution of the beaver in North America. And you see it covers most of the continent. This dark line here marks it well into Canada, Alaska, a little ways into Mexico. So essentially the whole country, with the exception of Florida. They say that beaver and alligators don't get along. This is the story of Massachusetts. They're trapped out by the 1660s, then reintroduced in the Berkshires in, I can't read that, but in 1932. And they've been gradually spreading since then. This is the situation as reported by this author in 1970s, but it wasn't quite up to date. Norm Corbin showed me a newspaper article that was written about his house on Howard Street, or Whitney Street, I'm sorry. And the article mentioned that owners of the house at the time had seen 2 beaver on the way to Howard Brook. And this was in 1960, so they're a little bit ahead of this map here. As I understand, well, this is 1998. As I understand, they're essentially covering all of Massachusetts now, with the possible exception of Cape Cod. And I don't know if that's because they haven't discovered Cape Cod yet, or maybe the conditions aren't quite right on Cape Cod, the beaver, ecology. This is kind of a complicated chart that I've been working on, and I have to confess it's still a work in progress. What I'm trying to do here is show you how we got to where we are now, and how a beaver might have found our area here in Northborough. This area was covered by continental glaciers starting about 60,000 years ago, and by 20,000 years ago they reached a maximum around down around Long Island and the Cape Cod and the islands. By 20,000 years ago. Then they started melting back, and then 5,000 years later it melted back to the Northborough area and was melting into a glacial lake Assabet. Glacial Lake Assabet was at an elevation of about 310 to 320 feet. Just a little higher than where we are right now. I think if you've been on the second floor, you'd be out of the lake. Downtown Northborough, about in the Church Street, Pleasant Street, and so forth, about 310, 320 feet. That was the level of the lake. And the lake gradually filled with sediments. And that probably took quite a while. We don't know, I don't know how long the lake was present, maybe 2,000, 3,000 years. But the level gradually dropped. But eventually the lake, as I understand, was draining into the Charles River drainage. As time went by, the Aspet River channel opened up and the lake level gradually in stages. Eventually reached its current stage, and now we're parked on the edge of the Asbet River Canyon here. We eventually reached the, how do I keep this? Eventually reached its current stage, and meanwhile, as the stream level was dropping, as the river level was dropping, the drainage net, the associated drainage nets, the tributary stream channels were forming, and the current drainage patterns that we see here now probably date back to about the time that the Asbet River drainage opened. The streams that drained into the Asbet River were deeply incised. They graded right through the technical term, graded to the level of the river. So they were probably pretty deeply incised, at least near the Asbet River. Streams such as Cold Howard Brook, Stirrup, and so forth. They found they were formed and found their pretty much their current pattern, drainage pattern. The area was forested first by conifers in this period. This is based on pollen analyses from wetlands in various parts of Massachusetts. First by conifers, and then about 9,000 years ago, a mixed forest, including deciduous shrubs and trees, came in. I don't know if this will hold up to close scrutiny, but beaver prefer deciduous trees to conifers. They'll munch on conifers, but that's not their favorite. They prefer deciduous trees and shrubs. So I'm saying that the beaver noticed this and moved in. So they had the right food there, attracted them to this area. This was probably, I'm saying, probably around 9,000 years ago. Coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally, that's about the time the indigenous people started occupying this part of the country as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, for about 9,000 years then, these beaver ponds were formed and organic sediments started accumulating in the ponds. And got pretty thick in places. And the current meadows now include organic sediments that could be, feet thick, maybe many feet thick, because it takes a long time for these organic sediments to accumulate to accumulate. So the beaver here, until about 400 years ago, and then as stated, they're trapped out, and these meadows then were ditched and farmed. Most of the meadows in Northborough I found have ditches indicating that they were farmed at some point in time. Now, I don't wrote this remarkably little information on that, but I'm still looking. Then, as mentioned, from 1960, the president of the beaver had returned, and they repopulated these wetland areas, and now they're trying to make things right. After all this farming and ditching, let's see if we can fix this now. The Clean Water Acts of the 1970s are pretty much protected, but not completely. What I plan to do here, in addition to what I've already said, is talk a little bit about these ditch wetlands. That's a topic that's been of special interest to me almost since I moved here. Have a farming heritage, and I'd like to know more about how these wetlands were modified for use in farming. I'll also talk a little bit about, I'll show some pictures that I've taken over the last year or so. Ever since I read this book, I said, well, I think I'll go out and see if I can find some beaver activity in town. I'd seen it before, but I sort of took it on as a hobby to try to find beaver activity here in Northborough. It wasn't hard, I can guarantee you. I'll show you the pictures later. We'll talk about a little bit about the pros and cons of beaver, having beaver around. I guess I have to confess that beaver, I once considered beaver a pest, rodent pest, but my attitude has changed considerably ever since reading this book by Phil. And I've just done an awful lot of research since then to this part. There's been a lot of work done on beaver habitats and activities. Most of it in the last, interestingly, most of it in the last 15 or 20 years. We stay, again, there's not an awful lot of information on ditched wetlands for farming, I found. I'm still looking. This is the best summary that I've seen. This is something that was written by Dr. David Foster, who was the director of the Harvard Forest in Peterstown for up until recently. And he had studied Thoreau's journals and extracted a number of statements from those. And this was his summary of what Thoreau witnessed in the Concord area. He said it was an age-old annual meadow cycle that Thoreau witnessed was age-old and thoroughly established across New England. For earliest days, grassy wetlands, both freshwater marshes along the river and salt marshes on the coast, provided an essential source of production, favoring grasses, shrubs, regulating the water table by ditching, and so forth. As I've stated, my observation is most wetlands in Northborough were ditched and farmed. If you look at aerial photographs of the area, almost every wetland has straight line channels, ditches. But there's very little information on how this farming was done. Lingering questions for me are, what was the period of wetland farming? What was the level of effort for ditching? Not only did they ditch, but they built pathways into these wetlands so to provide access for draft animals, presumably. What kind of maintenance was required? Did they have to dig these out every year? And what kind of crops? Presumably hay, but there may have been other crops. Other crops do well in organic-rich settlements. I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. Skip one. This is an area in Edmund Woods Conservation Area. It's a wetland area. The wetland currently is mapped here. I think, pretty sure this was a beaver pond at one point. There's no beaver there now for a reason I won't get into right now, but this was originally beaver pond that probably covered an area something like this, because that's the area underlain by organic settlements. These accumulated in a ponded environment. I've tried to map the ditches out here, and these are the ones that are apparent, and probably they were all interconnected at one time. No doubt they were interconnected at one time. The only ones that really show up on the maps are these straight lines right here. Another interesting thing about this area is there are pathways that have been built out there, and bridges cover these ditches in several areas. These are the ones I've seen, and maybe more out there. So these pathways have ditches so to provide access to draft animals. A lot of effort went into farming this area, farming these wetlands, maintaining them, harvesting the crops, and so forth. And it could be that the bulk of the agricultural products that were produced in Northborough, probably until the mid-1800s, maybe even later, were from these wetland areas. another example. I don't know if you can see it on, this is near the confluence of Stirrup Brook and Assabet River. This is one of the wetland areas that Janice Farmer talked about. You can see all these straight lines here, lots of straight lines. This area was extensively ditched and farmed. I don't know when that stopped, but it probably continued for quite a while. The birdsong trail that's been there for about 20 years now crosses some of these wetlands. You can't see it on this, but they follow the path, something like this. This area is all flooded now. It's been reoccupied by beaver. The beaver dam here, this is all flooded. You got to see ducks and geese and whatever out there. This is one of the bridges I was talking about. Flat stones, they hauled in these flat stones. First they built the roads, all over the flat stones to get over these ditches. And this, there are probably more of them out there. It's kind of a wet area. I haven't had the chance to explore that extensively. But these are the kind of ditches that I observed in 4 places in Edmund Woods. Here's another example. This is Old Robert Brook, Church Street, Bishop Street. Nice straight lines. Those don't happen in nature very often. Nice straight lines. That was obviously a dug channel. This is how there's a ditch here, ditches, and even be a dam right now. This is a popular area for beaver nowadays. They're always trying to build a dam right there. I'll show you an example later on. They keep coming back. They get trapped out, they keep coming back. You can't get rid of them. Like I say, there just isn't much information out there. There's actually more information on saltwater marshes than there are in freshwater wetlands. This is a painting that was done in Newbury Port Meadows in the late 1800s. You can see the haystacks out here in the distance. You probably can't see it from there, but this is an ox cart with people pitching hay onto the ox cart. Other crops, maybe there are other crops raised there. Don Heitzmer showed me this root cellar near the former Chute farm near Stirrup Brook. Root crops do some root crops, most root crops do very well in organic soils. So potatoes might have been a major product, for example, turnips, other root crops. And these were, I think these were fed farm animals along with hay. More work is needed. We don't know how long these meadowlands were farmed. Probably followed the pattern similar to other parts of Massachusetts. This is forested area in Massachusetts. There's been a lot of literature written on this, but basically the forest was cleared for agriculture until about 1850, 1860. Then they started growing back. There's been a lot of literature on this, on why that happened, the opening of the West. Introduction of grasses introduction of domestic grasses that were more nourishing and could be raised in upland areas, introduction of farm machinery that didn't operate very well on boggy soils. And I think in Northborough, at least, the major factor about this time was the railroads. They were able to bring in grains and so forth for other parts of the country and fertilizers. So they were able to more efficiently farm the uplands, and the forest started growing back. How long these wetlands operated, I don't know, but from our 20th century project, when we interviewed a number of former residents, we got information from Philip Sparrow, who grew up on the Sparrow farm. He said he reported in the early 50s that they were reclaiming swampy land. So they were still farming swampy land in the mid-1900s. Maybe some of you remember that, I don't know. Ted Leonard was the only person we interviewed. He talked about going down to the meadows near Cherry Street to mow hay for cattle. And just recently, Joanne Sullivan, she's here, told me that the wetland, the ditched wetland near her house on Church Street was farmed for hay. There must be some way of keeping that along. It was farmed for hay in her lifetime. So anyway, they were still farming these wetland areas well into the 1900s. Probably not as extensively as they were in the early, in the 1700s and early 1800s. Okay, then, as I mentioned, after I read this book, I decided to look around Northborough, see if I could find some evidence of beaver. My daughter is ruining the day that she ever gave me this book. The only thing I talk about anymore is beaver. So, first, this is December. This is right after, well, maybe while I was reading the book. I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can find some recent beaver activity. So I went out to Cold Harbor Brook area where I'd seen some beaver activity in the past. In fact, there was a dam out there on a peninsula that extended out into the wetland area. And the beaver dam is no longer there, it's gone. But I found evidence of beaver. So I didn't have to look too hard. Since then, I visited many, many places in Northborough where I thought I might find beaver, obviously near water, and I'm really disappointed. I almost always find them. Here's a few more examples. This is taken from what's the street?
Hudson Street.
This is the former Wallace Pond area. This dam washed out, what, 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And the beaver came along and said, maybe I can fix that. So they, this is a remnant of the beaver dam here, and I think they were strongly discouraged about building a dam at that location. I'm guessing they were probably trapped out, or at least moved, maybe moved. But they thought they could fix that. Pardon me if I anthropomorphize, if that's a word, beaver. This is another indication of beaver nearby. I can hear it now from a distance. Whoa! My favorite. Eastern cottonwood. Populus deltoides. Whoa! Breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert, all at one location. Beaver are strictly vegetarian. They prefer, well, they eat virtually, gnaw on virtually any kind of tree, but they prefer the poplars, willows, birches. Interestingly, they don't go after red maple very often, so that's kind of interesting. I don't know why that is. Anyway, here's, I mentioned Cold Harbor Brook, and this is one of the ditches that showed up on the earlier map. This is a beaver dam that was built around 2013. It was removed and they put in a beaver control at this location, a cage with a pipe that extended under this bridge here, and that was sort of effective for a while, I guess. I think they were discouraged there. They were discouraged from using this area because the high water was flooding out basements and septic systems nearby, and that's one of the issues with beaver, is they tend to raise the water level, not only in the ponds, but the adjoining groundwater system as well. Here's one I I knew there was water there. This is the Barefoot Brook flood control area. It's hard to get to. I thought, well, there's running water. Let's see if we can find some beaver activity there. Sure enough. This is the industrial area behind Whitney Street over here, so it's not too far from habitation. I want to focus a little bit on the Sturtbrook Meadow area. This is the area that is inhabited by the Goodnows. Mary Goodnow, as many of you are aware, was killed by the Indians. The stockade was located about here, was attacked, and she was out in the fields and lame and couldn't get back in time. She was scalped and left the body left out here. There's a grave site up here now. Many of you have probably been to that, or at least aware of it. This is an interesting, the whole Sturtbrook drainage is interesting from a wildlife habitat perspective. Beaver dam, beaver dam, beaver dam, beaver dam, beaver dam. Not so obvious, beaver dam. And there may be some others in between. These may not all be operative or maintained beaver dams at the same time. They tend to move around a little bit. I'll show you another picture. Here's a lodge picture that I took many years ago. I've been sort of interested in beaver for, well, ever since I moved here, I guess, and saw some beaver activity. This was taken, I was able to walk out on a frozen pond and took this picture about 20 plus years ago. This again is in the Sturtbrook drainage. Here's this is the culvert under the railroad track over Sturtbrook. It's just off of Ridge Road. You can see there's an effort there. Apparently beaver have been a nuisance in the past. They put a cage or a fence up here to keep the beaver out. There's a name for that. I just got it was called a deceiver. I don't know where they came up with that name. But anyway, so that kind of discourages the beaver from building a dam at that location. However, they found ways to get around it. I can hear the beaver now saying, well, they blocked off my access to Bartlett Pond. I guess I'll just have to drag my butt over the steep rise here to get in it. So it's created a path here. This is a path that goes up over the steep embankment and down the other side. And it looks like it's pretty well traveled. So they're moving from one part of Sturtbrook drainage to another. This picture was taken several years ago. You might see a familiar face or two in there. This is our senior center walking group. In February of last year, I wanted to give a picture of what the Goodnows might have seen, or early settlers might have seen, when they settled where they were looking at the Sturtbrook area. So I stopped across the road from Route 20 and walked over, and there was a beaver dam. No matter where you look, you're going to find, if there's water there, there's probably going to be beaver. Sadly, I did see a beaver there. Unfortunately, it's one that didn't quite make it across Route 20. Recently, I explored an area that was brought to my attention. This is off of Lyman Street, and these are the new high-rise condos over there. And this is a pond, an interesting area. It's not a stream, it's a seepage area, groundwater discharge area. And beaver have somehow figured out how to make this a pond. Obviously, they built a dam. And there's at least 3 of these beaver lodges out there like this. Here's some promoter saying, well, you can either have a high-rise apartment or a high-rise condominium, or we can make you a good deal on a quaint beaver lodge. It was a catch. You have to be able to swim underwater to get into it. Recognize this location. This is right in the center of town. It's a beaver dam. I'm guessing that won't last very long. Maybe it's gone by now, but there's a huge meadow upstream, which is, I'm sure, owes its origin to beaver activity over the eons. Okay, I was walking the Cold Harbor Trail 2 or 3 weeks ago and stopped at the culvert on Rice Avenue, not Rice, on Cherry Street, on Cherry Street. Just out of curiosity to see if I could see any beaver activity. And while I was standing there, this beaver came out, swimming around. I could almost hear him. There's that nerd who's been taking pictures of beaver for the last year or so. I'm going to give him a thrill and swim around here a little bit, gnaw on some reeds. And he was there for quite a while. I don't know if he probably saw him. He probably said to himself when he was leaving, I bet he runs home and tells his wife and daughter. That's exactly what happened. Okay, now I want to jump across the pond, not the beaver pond, the bee pond, to Scotland. This is a picture that my daughter took last summer when she and her partner were hiking across Scotland, in effect. And she saw some beaver activity. I've learned recently that beaver are being reintroduced. They were trapped out in Europe, I guess in the 1500s. But they've been reintroduced to Scotland and some parts of England to enrich the habitat. I guess mainly that's the main reason for bringing them back. It's a different species. Our beaver is castor canadensis. This is castor fiber. I find it interesting. If you look closely, their work here is perhaps a little more disciplined, neater than the beaver activities here in the United States or in North America. Maybe because of a stiff upper lip.
Very British.
And Ellen and Ernie visited a museum in South Carolina and saw this stuffed beaver there. So that's a pretty strong indication of beaver in South Carolina. Okay, now just list some of the positives and negatives of beaver activity. Just out of curiosity, how many here think of beaver as pests rather than parts of the environment? Well, the positive feature is that with all these dams, they reduce this data, and not so much in Massachusetts, but in other parts of the country. They reduced flood peaks. You know, they have these ponds that spread water out, and reduce the flood peaks. They've raised the groundwater level, so that because of that, the groundwater seepage into the streams continues even during very dry periods, and so they sustain low flows of streams. These very thick layers of deposits of carbon or sequestering carbon or thick peat layers. Biodiversity, support many types of flora and fauna. Ducks, geese, blue herons, turtles, you name it, whatever lives in a pond. Might put early indigenous people in that group as well. They were, if you look at the results of archaeological digs, a lot of the things that they're eating, in addition to beaver, would be found in beaver ponds, muskrats, ducks, geese, and so forth. And there's some indication that these organic rich sediments that we find in beaver ponds would remove or at least attenuate contaminants that might enter the system, either from groundwater or from surface water. And I want to highlight the widespread in Northborough, as I indicated here several times, good and bad. And I'd like to highlight Stirrup Brook, which I talked about earlier. I don't know how to state this, but for lack of a better term, I'm going to call that a prime beaver habitat. They're throughout the drainage, the Stirrup Brook, they're found throughout the Stirrup Brook drainage area. You've got ponds, you've got Chauncey Pond, Little Chauncey Pond, stream, you've got Bartlett Pond, nice mix of hydrologies there. And I don't know how to promote that, but maybe this is my first attempt at that. I think I'll keep talking about it. And maybe someone can set me straight on that. So, in conclusion, Northborough is beaver land. Okay, do we have time? Can I show a couple of videos?
Well, keep going.
Okay. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I met with a former colleague with the USGS who was, he mentioned me once when I expressed interest in beaver, that he was a licensed beaver trapper. So immediately we had something very much in common there, in addition to former employment. And so we had coffee together, and he brought another person who I've interacted with before, a hydrologist, and a woman by the name of Gaynor Bigelback, who was lives in Shirley and is a beaver enthusiast and is associated with the Discovery Museum in Acton. But she gave me some, I'm going to get rid of this. She sent a couple of videos that are kind of fun. What happened? Oh, it's over here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Grab it.
I'm just trying to enlarge the screen here. I didn't realize I made a noise. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Chomp, 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 chomp. Whoop. Huh? One more.
He looks driving.
Beaver is applying a mud coating to its lodge. I've seen this on the lodges I've looked at. There's often an 8% mud. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but they put this apron on there that covers up at least part of the lodge. So that's it.